I'm the History Guy. I have a degree in history and I love history. And if you love history too, well then this is the channel for you. On January 15th, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 under the command of Captain Sullenberger was forced to ditch in the Hudson River after engine failure, making international headlines and turning Captain Sully into an international hero. But U.S. Air 1549 was not by any means the first passenger aircraft that was forced to ditch in the ocean. And in fact, in the era before jet engines, it was more common. And there was a particular instance in 1956 where a passenger plane had to ditch in much more terrifying circumstances. And it is definitely a story worth remembering. And that is why today the History Guy remembers the story of Pan American Flight 6. The Boeing 377 Stratocruiser began flying commercial routes in 1949. It was a state-of-the-art aircraft for its time. It had, for example, a pressurized cabin, which was rare for passenger aircraft at the time. It was powered by 4 massive 28-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radial engines. It could be configured for as many as 85 passengers, but was more often configured to have sleeping berths. Only 55 Stratocruisers were manufactured. The first airline to purchase the Stratocruiser was Pan American Airways, and the first route that they flew was between Honolulu and San Francisco, although the Stratocruiser was used to fly long-haul routes all over the world. It was a plane known for luxurious travel, but it was also expensive to operate. On October 16, 1956, the Pan American Boeing 377 Stratocruiser named Clipper Sovereign of the Skies took off from Honolulu, bound for San Francisco at 8:26 p.m., with an expected flight time of 8 hours and 54 minutes. The plane had 24 passengers and 7 crew, and was commanded by Captain Richard N. Ogg, an experienced pilot with over 13,000 hours of flight time gained over 20 years of service. The plane reached a cruising altitude of 13,000 feet and traveled for 4.5 hours without incident, just crossing the midpoint or point of no return on the route. It was then that the crew made a schedule increase in altitude to 21,000 feet. And that's when the trouble began. When the plane reached the right altitude, the co-pilot throttled back the engines for cruising speed. But the engine on the far left refused to throttle back. Instead, it faced something called prop governor failure and started overspinning. Literally, the engine was running so fast that it ran the risk that it would tear itself apart. The crew cut off the supply of oil to the engine, allowing the engine to seize, but the propeller kept spinning in the wind, which was causing drag. That meant that the other 3 engines had to work harder for the plane to maintain altitude, and that caused the engine on the far right to start to sputter, and it also had to be cut off. Halfway between San Francisco and Honolulu, the aircraft lost 2 of its 4 engines in less than 10 minutes. The plane dipped, waking the sleeping passengers in their berths. The plane could fly with 2 engines, but at much reduced speed, and the crew realized the crisis. They no longer had enough fuel at that speed to reach San Francisco or to get back to Hawaii. In the passenger compartment, the PA buzzed. It was Captain Ogg. He told them, "There might be the possibility of a ditching. Please put on your life jackets, strap on your safety belts, and remove sharp objects from your pockets." The cabin crew started talking to the passengers about what to do in a ditching. The passengers were terrified, but nobody panicked. The air crew knew that the risks of ditching in the ocean were magnified at night when the pilot could not observe the ocean and its swells, so they quickly worked out the best plan that they could. The United States Coast Guard kept a cutter on station at a place called Point November, which was midway between Hawaii and California. The purpose of the cutter was to do weather observation and provide navigational assistance to airplanes and ships. And the Sovereign of the Skies had just passed over the cutter when it started having its engine problems. The cutter that was on station that day was the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Pontchartrain under the command of Commander W.K. Cale. Ogg radioed the Pontchartrain and said that the Sovereign of the Skies would fly back to the Pontchartrain's location where they could ditch close to rescue. Once they were circling the Pontchartrain, the crew calculated that they had enough fuel left to circle until daylight, which would greatly improve their chances in a water landing. Imagine what it was like for the passengers. They knew the plane was going to crash, but now they had to sit and circle in the dark for 5 hours before that was going to happen. The crew went over instructions on what to do and got volunteers to help with the life rafts, while on the Pontchartrain they put together the plan to rescue the passengers. In those days, the Coast Guard regularly practiced ditching drills. The purser on the flight, who was the head of the cabin crew, was Patricia Reynolds, and she had over 10 years' experience with the airline. She remembered that there had been an accident a year previously with another aircraft, and in the landing the tail had been torn off, and so she moved the passengers to the center of the plane. There were twin 18-month-old girls on board with their parents, and that was a problem as the plane did not have safety belts their size. And so they did the best they could. They put the girls in the parents' laps and spread pillows around them. At daylight, the Pontchartrain laid down a layer of foam on the ocean that would show the safest place to land and would prevent a fire from the fuel. Captain Ogg took the plane down, but almost immediately the worst happened. The left wing hit an ocean swell. That spun the plane around violently, tore off the tail, damaged the nose. One of the crew members of the Pontchartrain remembered looking at the wreckage and thinking, no one could survive that. But passengers started climbing out of the wrecked fuselage and inflating the plane's rafts. The Coast Guard raced to their rescue. The entire rescue took less than 5 minutes, and the last 2 people off the plane were Captain Ogg and Purser Reynolds. Miraculously, all the passengers and crew were safe and accounted for with only minor injuries. Less than 20 minutes after ditching, the Sovereign of the Skies sunk beneath the waves. Had they crash-landed anywhere but right next to a ship that was ready to rescue them, it could have been much worse. The passengers completed the trip to San Francisco on board the Pontchartrain. The Navy tried to horn in and send an aircraft carrier for them, but the Coast Guard was having none of it. Pan Am thanked the crew of the Pontchartrain by giving each and every member of the crew a bottle of fine whiskey. The Stratocruisers actually had a good safety record for their time, but they were eventually replaced by jet engines. And jet aircraft are not just faster, but more reliable. And of course, as U.S. Air Flight 1549 proves, accidents still can happen with jet engines. And while the two accidents are really very different, Captain Sullenberger had moments to make a decision but was very near civilization. Captain Ogg had hours to make decisions but was truly in the middle of nowhere. What really happened in both cases is that the flight crews, who must have been terrified themselves but never showed it, kept their heads in a crisis, and because that, their passengers survived. And that makes them, by any definition, heroes. Heroes worth remembering. I'm the History Guy. I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button that's on your left. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to write them in the comment section, and I will be happy to respond. And if you would like 5 more minutes of forgotten history, all you need to do is click the subscribe button